Hello, everybody across Australia and anyone tuning in from overseas as well. Welcome to the August edition of Lowell Lodestar's Drilling Deeper webinar. This month, very excited to have an old colleague of mine and someone who played a big part in the discovery of one of the biggest gold discoveries in Australia in recent memory, Andy Beckwith, just recently from De Grey. Good morning, Andy, and welcome.
Morning, John.
Thank you very much for participating in the Drilling Deeper webinar. I'm looking forward to getting a couple of gems of wisdom as to how you and the team did it, whether they're little pearls of wisdom or they're big ones. I'm sure there'll be something in there for everybody. So before we kick off, just a little bit of housekeeping. We're going to have three segments as per usual. Firstly, we'll kick off with a little discussion about what's happening in the market. And we're going to, because we've got Andy on this month, we're going to talk about M&A because De Grey obviously was part of one of the biggest M&A, if not the biggest gold M&A transaction this year in Australia in terms of gold. Then we'll turn it over to Andy to tell us about himself, about the background to the massive Hemi discovery. Then we'll hear a little bit about what he's been up to since leaving De Grey and what he's working on now. And then we'll have hopefully some time for a bit of Q&A. Other than that, look, I need to reiterate, this won't be financial advice, and please do your own research and seek professional advice in any investment decision. So firstly, without further ado, turning to the market prospects section of our webinar. And as mentioned today, I want to talk about the M&A that's been happening, particularly in the gold sector in Australia. What I want to talk about just briefly this morning is the M&A that's been happening in the metals and mining space, and in particular the gold space in Australia. And you can see a list of takeovers and deals that have been done in 2025, with Northern Star's takeover of De Grey being the biggest one by far, with a nominal value of 5 billion Aussie dollars. The most recent one that was announced just last week was the Capricorn takeover of Lowell Resources, also in WA, in the WA goldfields. So what we're seeing is, with the very high gold price, we're seeing more interest in M&A in the sector, as well as perhaps some growing amount of mergers and acquisitions, which I attribute at least partly to the growing cash balances of many gold producers, given the high Aussie dollar gold price and what you might call the discipline in terms of not having grade creep, downwards creep, I should say, in terms of keeping the margin that gold production of gold producers, or expanding that margin and growing their cash balances. So Andy, I just wanted to maybe fire a couple of questions at you to get a bit of background about the takeover of De Grey. It was a little bit, at least from my perspective, I didn't see Northern Star as being the most obvious acquirer. Obviously, there was a lot of speculation, given it was one of the best discoveries and biggest discoveries we've seen in a long time. I think there was speculation that it might have gone to an overseas or North American gold company. I mean, presumably there were lots of interested parties, and were there many others that were close to the mark?
One of the big things with Hemi was we probably outstripped some of the potential takeovers very quickly. In terms of the discovery was very rapid. So the pool of companies probably that were going to target us towards the end became smaller, the bigger companies. And yes, I probably thought maybe an overseas company might see us as cheap with the exchange rate, etc. So Northern Star did come out of the blue a little. And I think they certainly came maybe a bit earlier than we thought the real threat would be. Personally, I thought it would be after we got into production, and maybe that's when they would target us, less risk, obviously. And maybe that's why Northern Star has come in early, to try and beat that larger company coming in and being a little bit more risk adverse.
And do you think there were key milestones that really catalyzed the takeover? Was it the getting along the permitting path, or was it the financing path, or was it, just the fact that, a little bit of FOMO, that they might miss out?
Yeah, look, I don't think there was any one critical thing. We were probably getting close to finding out where the approval process was. The approval process, once that's through and finalised, obviously probably makes it a bit more attractive for everybody. So, yeah, I think they've made their move knowing the Australian approval process stronger than maybe some overseas companies, and thought they could handle that. So, yeah, we're pretty advanced on that already. Now, our intention was to build it, not to be taken over. So we weren't out there spruiking it, if you want to call it that.
Right.
They came to us. We said we'd listen, provided the value's there for shareholders.
Okay. All right. So you weren't running a process. You didn't have investment bank out there brooking it around the world. Presumably you drove a very hard bargain. I assume that the initial price that they discussed was lower than the final price.
Definitely.
Yeah.
Obviously the pricing's the hardest part. I suppose myself might have been one of the last ones to cave in. Being involved with the project, being a geologist, it's the geo's dream to find it and build it and get into production. So for me, it was more the downside rather than the upside. I suppose the way the deal was structured, it was at a nominal price, and we were still, it takes 6 months to finalise these things, and anything can happen. So the downside was probably the biggest risk for me. Fortunately, the gold price probably helped us along with the American politics going on at the same time. In the end, it was announced as a $5 billion deal. It probably finished on a $6 billion deal, thankfully, on the gold price helping us along.
Yeah. I'm probably underrepresented on this chart, but I think you're right. $6 billion probably where it ended up.
Yep.
And so I guess what we're interested in, or everybody's interested in, is what's next, and just picking the Lowell Resources Fund top 10 portfolio. We certainly think that there's potential M&A in some of the companies that are in the fund's top 10. In particular, New World Resources is pretty much a done deal. That has benefited from being in the US. That's not gold, obviously. That's copper in the US, which has been extremely topical with the Trump tariffs. So that was a takeover battle between a European base metal miner and a North American private equity fund. Other things, we think that Astral Resources south of Kalgoorlie with 1.7 million ounces and possibly or probably within 12 months of taking an FID decision, that could be something that looks attractive to neighbours such as Goldfields or Westgold. Overseas, Free Gold Ventures, put it there. It's even bigger than Hemi. That's Free Gold come out with their Golden Summit resource of 29 million ounces at a bit over a gram near the Fort Knox gold mine of Kinross. So we think that at some point, while it's definitely not as advanced as Hemi, may be in line for some M&A. And then Saturn Metals, low-grade project, but the economics look really very attractive at these Aussie dollar gold prices, and in a region around Leonora where there's a number of mid-tier players who looking to expand their resources and reserves. And finally, Sunstone Metals, basically saying that they're in a process. They're overseas, they're in Ecuador for their massive gold, copper exploration targets. They've been publicly announced that they're talking to numerous parties about some form of a deal, whether it's project level or corporate level. So look, that's just an example of perhaps a fairly small universe of companies in our portfolio as a representation of the large amount of potential M&A that may be brewing in the sector. Andy, I don't know if you've got any other, apart from Carnavale, you've got any other companies that you think might be in the pipeline for M&A? We're probably going to see some more by the end of the year.
Definitely, there'll be more. I think probably what I'm seeing is a lot of smaller companies. With the gold price being up, some of these small deposits that are a little bit like the Carnavale situation that we'll talk about. These things are quite economic at these high gold prices. So getting together with a partner or somebody with a mill is going to be an important thing, or at least a joint venture scenario. So on the smaller end, I think there'll be more as well. The bigger companies, I think it will be continual. They have to replace reserves and resources as they're mining. So yeah, they're not necessarily exploring themselves. They might be doing their near deposit exploration, but maybe not new exploration. So any company that has a new deposit within trucking distance or that has economics to build its own plant, they've got to be a target in the current gold price.
Yeah. And do you think with the great takeover, was it driven by, it was driven by the potential production profile, presumably? It wasn't so much just adding reserves or adding resources. It was really, production ounces.
No, you'll see in my PowerPoint and discussion later on that, yeah, the resources reserves potentially is roughly 20% of Northern Star with the Hemi asset. So, yeah, they certainly came to us saying this will be the fourth production pillar. And that's the most important thing for, I think, our shareholders, was that they would take it to production. They've got the benefit of other production. Shareholders have got, you could argue, lower risk profile under Northern Star.
Andy, I might ask you to share your screen to take us through both the Hemi story, the De Grey story, and your own personal career, which we're really looking forward to hearing about.
So yeah, look, thank you for inviting me to be involved in this. It's a bit daunting talking about yourself a little, but Hemi was a fantastic discovery. That's a photo of some of the drill out during it. And look, Hemi's a very rare large-scale gold discovery. Like you said, it's very few and far between in recent history in Australia. But I think the thing that probably makes it even stand out more was it was delineated rapidly. And that's a function of its scale and the style of mineralization. But it's also, I've got to give credit to everybody in the team. Our consultants, our contractors, they all put in hard. And importantly, during the COVID times, so it was even more difficult. So it's just an exceptional effort put in by everybody. Northern Star are now entrusted to develop it. So it's an incredible tier one asset in a tier one country. So it's a great asset.
The drill out was, you went right through some pretty hot periods up there in the Pilbara. You just added more and more rigs, and it would have been pretty hard yakka for some of the drilling.
Yeah, it's 3 months of 45 degrees. It's COVID thrown in. You've got potential cyclones, wet seasons. It was a strong effort. So I think we peaked at 16 drill rigs at one stage, just building camps quick enough, getting approvals to do those things. People don't see that side of the story. So my background's a geologist, originally from Adelaide, now living in Perth the last 25 years. I hate to say it, 40 years roughly experience, mostly in Australia, a little bit in America and Africa, certainly looking in those places, if not working. And obviously myself, Phil Tonatore and Alan Nishaw won the AMEC award, but really that represents everybody's hard work. Like I said, born in Adelaide, sort of educated in Adelaide, then went on to ride my motorbike across the Nullarbor to get a job with BP Minerals, my first job. Got sent to Parapadu and we worked on the project up there where we found Mount Olympus. Unfortunately, they sold the company on us just as we were starting to define it, and I moved on to North Flinders. I didn't hang around to be retrenched. I might add, retrenchment's not a bad thing in life. It sounds bad, but it can be good for you at times. I went on to North Flinders for about 7 years during the time when Cali and Ground Rush and DBS were being discovered. So exciting times for North Flinders. And it's probably, I think for me, probably where it hit home the value of a discovery and the value it can create for shareholders and also the staff and the ownership. It's obviously where I've met you, John, but also I met my wife there, so it's an important part of my life. I left there after Normandy took over, a couple of years after they took over, and joined Helix with Tony Martin, and basically was at the first sort of part of opening up the Gawler Craton. Calcrete sampling was all the rage. They had a huge anomaly. They had a few drill results, I think, by the time I turned up, but we drilled out the first resource. So that was a pretty major, exploration effort. And both of those are, both those companies in particular are under huge areas of cover. So it's coming up with techniques how to explore. So those two companies, I think, geochemically and geologically, probably sort of set my scene in background in my geology and exploring. Helix evolved into Acacia, and then Anglo Gold took over Acacia, and they had a bit of a rationalisation. Ended up moving to Perth, working with Sunrise around the Laverton region, but also looking at other projects and rationalising projects. So part of my role was sort of selling projects, closing down offices here and there, but also got involved in Tropicana with my sort of calcrete knowledge over in South Australia. Was able to lend a bit of hand there. But unfortunately, we were a bit of a downturn there in the market as well. So we were rationalising projects. Exploration in Australia was almost going to be shut down by Anglo Gold. We managed to keep them involved in Tropicana. And thankfully we did, because after we sold all the other projects, which I was heavily involved in, which is what some of it went into Westgold, in fact. But basically, we got rid of half the exploration team just as we discovered Tropicana, including myself. So I was there for the early geochemical sort of side of it and doing the deal. We did the first drill hole, the first diamond hole went into it, just as we all got retrenched. And then 6 weeks later, after we'd left, the assays came back, and that's now gone as part of the pit. So that's life. Duncan did ring us up, and a few of us up, and say, "Do you want to come back?" And I think most of us had moved on by this time, but that turned out to be a fabulous discovery in its own right. So involved in that in my own way. Some of the projects I did sell on were Yandal and Rover up in the Northern Territory to another couple of guys, Tony Martin and Brian Thomas. When they found out that I wasn't involved with Anglo Gold anymore, they said, "Come and join us." So I thought, that sounds like a good idea, seeing I knew the projects. We eventually put that into Westgold. So it was people and projects and no money. Westgold had some money, so it was a good marriage. We managed to go and discover Rover 1, or rediscover Rover 1 from 30 years ago, renegotiating with the original groups to get in after 30 years of veto. It's now in a sort of production sort of scenario under Castile Rover. But before I left as MD, after about 5 years, we'd built the assets up to about 5 million ounces with the acquisition of the Q assets. We basically merged with Metals and Peter Cook was our major shareholder. And basically they went on to incubate it for a few years. They bought the Meekatharra assets and then refloated Westgold. And Westgold's come on now as I was going to say a mid-tier Australian producer. They're probably a bit larger than that these days. So my CV gets better every time they pump out more ounces, which is good. And then really Carnavale probably came really next, but I've left it till last because that's where I'm currently sort of doing it. De Grey sort of distracted me from Carnavale for a few years there. It was a good distraction. We obviously went on and found Hemi, and we've discussed that, and we'll discuss it a little bit more in a few more slides. But and currently on a NED on Carnavale, we've got a nice little niche discovery, and we're looking to develop that in the near term. So I just wanted to sort of remind people why you invest in these juniors. 10,000 invested in De Grey in 2016, or even all the way up to January 2020, after the first aircore holes, 2 months after the first aircore holes, I might add, you could have still picked us up for roughly 4 cents. That at its peak after the takeover was probably worth $650,000. So that's the reward. Not everybody does it, of course, but that's what the game's about. I'm not going to dwell on too much of the details of Hemi that much really, but it is a top 5 Australian mine if it was in production now, maybe top 3, depending on the final outcome. 6 million ounce reserve from about 11 million ounce resource. And I think the other thing to remember is we already had 2.2 million ounces that nobody gave credit to us for. In the current climate, at $5,000 gold price, I would imagine we would have had a much better market cap than we did at this time, which was about 50 million at the time before Hemi. The other thing with Hemi is all of the numbers you see out in the public at a $2,700 gold price. So plug in 5,000, it's a much better story. And that'd be certainly why Northern Star are very keen on the project. Like I said earlier, Hemi represents good 20% of their resources reserves. And obviously it is one of their next major developments. So it'll be pretty exciting to see that happen over the coming years. Just sort of visually, that's sort of where we rate against some of the other main production centres around Australia. So we're in the sort of top three, certainly the top handful. And, you know, just in terms of the cash, it rates very highly. So sort of probably what I'll sort of dwell a bit on is just a bit of the discovery. Try not to bore everybody, but yeah, I got involved in 2016. Simon and Craig rang me up and said, would you mind looking at this project? And I'm going, where is it? In the Pilbara. I'm going, what is it? Kind of had the feeling, what am I going to do looking at a gold project in the Pilbara? Nothing to be found up there. They had 300,000 ounces when I started. Didn't know what they were doing with it. They were cleaning out the company. It was a beaten up old exploration company, basically, with no direction. They got rid of a fair few projects. Probably weren't sure what they were going to do with the company, might have even gone tech, but maybe put another project in. They asked me to look at it. I was quite surprised when I went up there and had a look at the data. I'm going, well, quite good work's been done for a start. It's got some resources. They're all open. Wherever I look, you know, most of the good work was done in subcropping to outcropping areas and nothing undercover, really. Lots of structure, and it just looked attractive. Managed to convince them to keep it. We raised a bit more money, and we got on with basically looking for gold and exploring those resources. Phil helped me by joining sort of 6 months later, and then we progressively basically did extensional drilling along strike from most of the known deposits, really. We did an option agreement to acquire the project to the west, Indy, off the Chinese for $15 million. I think we had a market cap of about 5 at the time, so that was a big acquisition. ASX had a few queries about us. So in the end, that was the price the Chinese wanted. We needed it. We thought it had some similar sort of ounces publicly. It had a small mining pit on it, but we felt it was the other half of the project, basically, structurally and geologically. So we did the option over it. It took us 3 years to finalise that. We paid them out $12 million in the end, and they took $3 million of shares, which they weren't going to at all at one stage. And they're very thankful they did in the end, because that's now worth well over $100 million to them, and they smile every time they see us. So, and they're good friends. They were the best supporting shareholders I think we've ever had. So we grew the shear zone resources basically to 2.2 million ounces pre-Hemi effectively. Nobody was really recognising us. I thought we had a development project of 100,000 ounces plus already, but could get no traction. We had a market cap around that, you know, sub 50. We raised $22 million in August 2019. Hard work, and that felt painful. But we needed to pay the Chinese 12, and then we had money left over to explore. So that money for exploration was basically set aside for wide-spaced regional drilling along structures and our intrusion targets. Now, those intrusion targets came about because we had bought the Chinese project, and we had recognised after some drilling at Taurana that, you know, this is a different style of mineralisation to all the different shear zone mineralisation we're pretty much drilling everywhere else. And the ounces were stacking up quite quickly. And we'd already done a geological interp with Alan, and those guys were all putting on targeting, was already well and truly been done. We'd revamped all of and validated all the past exploration data. It struck me as something a bit different. So I asked Al to go back and rethink the targeting, and definitely look for all the intrusions. So he spent probably 3 months scouring drill holes on the ground with, you know, tweezers looking for rocks, and quite quite detailed, and then came back with a series of targets, and that's what we went and chased. 5 of those targets actually had a little bit of air core drilling or some other drilling or some sort of sampling already on them, and they were all anomalous. So the only one that didn't was Hemi, and you'll see that in the picture in a sec, but that's the one that stood out that we hadn't tested. So it took us 4 months to get those approvals to drill them, some delays with the drilling approvals. But once we got going, we actually put the first air core into it in November 19. First results came out in December, just before Christmas. Nobody cared. We thought they were pretty good, a bit different. They're good intersections, as you'll see in a sec. But two months basically went by before we got back in January, but results for the first follow-up air core at Aquila, what it became Aquila, occurred, and it wasn't until February that anybody took notice. So even though we drilled the discovery holes in my mind, nobody cared. So March was the first RC drilling, and that was Brolga, and you'll see a couple of quick sections on that. And then within just over 12 months, we've basically defined 6.8 million ounces, which is unheard of in my books. So it was staggering. And a lot of that is about the scale of the discovery, its width, its consistency, and its grade, simple as that. And then it's a cluster of 6 of them. So it's, and that's why it was being so quick to delineate, and it just drove itself basically. And I think the other thing is probably the experienced crew we had could see from very early this was going to be big and could make some decisions. So we'll have a bit of a chat in a couple of slides about that. And obviously takeover recently. So there were some distractions along the way. I've been distracted from Carnavale by De Grey, and then we had the conglomerate gold and the watermelon seeds. Not all bad. We did raise money on this and it did help us along, but it was always never our focus. We were always into the bedrock and the shear zones and obviously the intrusions. These are the first cross sections that went out in December, 43 at nearly 4 grams and 25 at nearly 3 grams, and nobody paid attention. We had a great Christmas lunch, but that was it. Because this went out the day before Christmas lunch, I think.
Yeah, I remember it. I paid attention. I really, they were amazing results.
And to us, these were different. And that first air core drilling that went into Aquila and the results came in February, they looked staggering to us. And this is, sitting on holidays down south actually, and Phil rang me and said, "Have you seen the results?" And I'm going, "What results?" And he goes, explain them to me. And I said, "Well, that's pretty staggering." And he used some other words, which Phil is not known to say. And he's normally very, very quiet and subdued. He was quite animated. And anyway, the text that came back was about later in that day was some more results had come in, and there was some more expletives on the text message, and it all started from there basically. And just on the right-hand side, you'll see the consistency of assays. It's just staggering, some of those first results. They're 4s and 5s and 2s, hardly any dead zones. And that's what makes it. There's hardly any dilution. And then this is the first RC rig, happened to be drilling the second line and became Brolga, and the first hole got 93 at 3.3. That's basically the section. And then we had what we could see was sulfides in a few other holes. And that was an important thing. We recognized that pretty quickly. And the most staggering thing about this was, and we didn't know it at the time, this was 200 meters wide. And we were trying to connect it as a structure oblique to the other one. And it wasn't. So that's the difference with Brolga. It is 400 meters wide in the end and 600 meters long, and most of it's mineralized. And that's why the economics is so good. This is basically a final section. You'll see the red smaller pit inside there. That's basically the sort of the basic design for the starter pit. That starter pit pays for the whole project basically in less than 2 years, and probably in the current gold price less than 1 year. It's staggering. So these things are open at depth. Every deposit's open at depth, as you see this. So Northern Star have got a lot of work ahead of them, but also a lot of upside as well. So that's just the cluster. Brolga itself is the main starter pit, pays for everything. The rest happened very quickly through step-out drilling, geochemistry, following our nose and structure, and a little bit of luck on a couple of, particularly Eagle, which I'll explain in a sec. But it's the rapid resource growth from 2020 to 2025 has been exceptional. And remembering the scale's different, we started at a base of 0.3 million ounces when I joined, and Phil was not far behind. So, the discovery rate, the cost per ounce is low, and that's just magnifies the whole project. And like all other good deposits, I expect Hemi to grow over time. It grew obviously under our management as we drilled it out, but I expect to see under Northern Star's growth over the next 10, 20 years, it to continue to grow like most other good deposits. I'd just like to remind people that it's not just the current De Grey management. Dennis O'Meara put this package together in 2002 and floated it. They had the Hemi deposit on their original tenure and have had it all the time. And unfortunately for their geos at the time, who did exceptionally good work, I might add, they just happened to not get 2 drill holes to work. And I'll show you that in the slides. This is
it was a drilling, partly a drilling issue, just a technical drilling issue.
I've got a couple of slides after this photo that I'll try to explain that. This is just a slide I threw in there. This is the Chinese on signing the option and finalising everything. Great bunch of blokes and good friends. And they were highly supportive of extensions without charging us. They couldn't have been better shareholders.
Nearly as good as Lowell.
Well, they're still shareholders, I think.
Yeah.
So De Grey, like I said, had shear zone mineralisation. These were the 5 targets just around Hemi. You'll see it's not called Hemi there. They're after birds. Alan named them. And as soon as the good results came out, I told him there's no way I'm not calling out that. It's shortened to Hemi from day one. That is the only one that hadn't had any drilling on it previously. The rest have some drilling on them way back then. So this is the current layout of the mine site, basically, and the green dots here are the previous drilling by De Grey before we started, and you'll see that line over Yukon Eagle, and we'll go to a section there. They had tried to drill this area, and they drilled up to the edge of Brolga within 300 metres. Scooby was basically where they were drilling, and that's primarily because there was less cover on those areas, and they had some geochemistry showing through and some mag targets they chased up. But this is the line that they drew, and they did 2 phases of drilling. Both phases failed to get through over the intrusion because of the cover sequence and the little bit of paleo channel, and there's some gravels at the bottom. Just could not get through it. So unfortunately for them, they missed out, and they did try. They recognised it. So they recognised that they didn't get through, and they went back and tried again and failed. And so it was basically very difficult drilling. That's the mineralisation under it for Eagle. Would they have found it? I think the next slide is one of ours, but kind of highlights, this is now Yukon. This is our drilling, but, we weren't overly impressed with these air core results. They sat there for a while. How many companies and projects have those sort of results and don't follow them up? So would they have got the discovery? Who knows? We sat on these for a while, and the only reason we came and drilled them was we wanted to do a line of geophysics over some of the other areas we're drilling, and Phil had to put the RC rig somewhere, and he chose this line. So thankfully he did. He is a bit of a magnet for gold, I should say. He seems to be able to sniff it out and now it's this. So that low geochem was hiding something much bigger underneath it. And it's that transported cover and the alluvial channel that was the drama. And it took us quite a bit to drill those holes. So that's all I really got on De Grey, other than, unless you got some more questions, John. But I got a few lessons I think are important. I won't read them all out. Look, De Grey had done pretty good work prior to me joining. It got a bit chopped up with a few things that happened corporately in the intervening years. And it took us quite a long time to find all the old data, validate it and recompile it. but it was good quality data to start with. So we had a good base. From that, we were able to convince the board to keep the project. There were offers to sell it for not much money. Past director, I think, was one of them. That was probably the turning point. And gold was just turning as well, we felt. So there was a chance for some, and we could see that there was early growth potential with just doing more detailed work around the known stuff to start with. We built that resource up. We had to do some acquisitions, and corporately, yeah, that was a nightmare back there when you've got a market cap of $4 million trying to raise money. Nobody believes there's gold in the Pilbara. Yeah, it was just tough work, tough time. We then secured that western half, which led to the recognition of Taurana. So it's that geological recognition of ounces and how we find them. It's also, the support of the board. We had Ed Eshues and Bruce Barncutt on the board at that time as well. They were highly encouraging. They had a business model on finding gold for less than $20 an ounce, having it revalued at 50 to 100, and finding big deposits. And they saw our big tenement package and all the structure and what we had done to date as very encouraging. So they were big investors, and they've done well out of it as well. That recognition of Taurana and Alan's good work of going and then hunting it all down and truthing it was fundamental. We recognised it, but then we went and searched it. And we actually put a release out, I think, in July 2019 saying we're looking for intrusion-related deposits now as well. We told the world before we found it that we're going to look for it, which is unheard of. And then we found it, which was great. I think the other thing is a lot of the geos, myself and Phil and Alan and others, we'd worked in big companies, so we knew what scale meant, and also what had to be done once you find it and how fast you need to do it and what you need to provide all the engineers and things like that. So I think that helps. And obviously the effective drilling scenario, obviously the De Grey team prior to us had tried twice and still had failed. So drilling technique comes into it, and perseverance on drilling and making sure you get quality samples. And then obviously the difference between a shear zone that's 20, 30 metres wide and adding ounces versus intrusions that are 50 to 400 metre wide, it just is mind-boggling, the economics and the difference that makes. And we had established some pretty good geological and supporting sort of systems pretty early. It's that big company mentality, handling data. And then it became things like, handheld XRFs on the rigs on the day. We weren't looking for gold, we were just tracking the arsenic. So that allowed us to recognise arsenic in the profile and down drill holes pretty quickly, like almost immediately. And that allowed us to plan the next hole there and then without waiting for assays. The bags wouldn't have even left site by the time we'd already planned a second hole and a third hole, etc. Even though we were fast tracking assays. The other thing is just we had a good relationship with our drillers and assay company. This is assays in particular. We were getting 2 to 3 week turnaround. Others were getting 6 to 8 week turnaround. But we were pumping in volume as well. So we were probably a number one client of ALS at the time. And then obviously Top Drill with the drilling, they were able to get rigs quickly and beef up as quick as we could. Like we mentioned before, this all happened just as COVID hit. So pretty much the same week. So the fact that WA was less impacted than the rest of Australia maybe, and the government put so much importance on the mining side. They made sure that the mining companies could still operate because it drove WA and probably Australia. And the other thing was we did lots of drilling and we did it fast. We did 1 million metres in just over 2 years, and I think it's 1.5 million to date on the Hemi sort of area.
That's just an awesome
pretty much De Grey.
presentation.
I suppose, are there any questions on any of that before we do anything?
Look, we've got one here from Peter Arden in Melbourne. We are a bit tight for time, but do you see more scope for some other parts of Hemi like Yukon and Eagle and the broader Malina area and prospects like Charity Well to become more significant?
Most definitely. The down plunge of extension of every one of those deposits at Hemi is still open. Yukon, Eagle have got some nice high-grade overprint. So some of the underground potential might be seen as higher there. The ounces per vertical metre over that whole cluster of Hemi is very important for the extensions at depth. Yeah, we've drilled 400 meters vertically, basically, and the things don't stop just because there's a line on a section. Geologically, it goes much deeper. We've proven that with some holes, but it's just going to take time, and maybe some of that's best done from underground. Some other areas, the Malina shear zone, there'll be more shear zone related mineralization found as more work is completed on it. There is no doubt about that. The ounces per vertical meter run is great, so they're probably not the priority. The priority will be the intrusion related targets. Charity Well, we hit some intrusion there. It's not looking as good to me, but these are very subtle targets in the magnetics and finding them. And once you get on, it's when you get into the drilling, and that's when they can rapidly evolve. So I'm probably not so bullish on the Charity Well side, but Hemi, there's a lot more to be found around the Hemi region and along that immediate corridor.
Thanks, Andy. Well, we better keep moving quickly.
Yep. I just threw this slide in. I've looked in places like Cote d'Ivoire. This one's DRC. Carnavale had a project in Uganda, a tungsten thing, outcropping ore body, statistical nightmare. So we pulled out of that in the end. It would have taken thousands of drill holes. Where Carnavale sits right now is Kookynie. We had a brand new discovery under cover again. It was surrounded by small deposits, historical deposits mostly. It's in the Leonora area, so it's got good credentials all around it. We saw a sort of a tenement package that was really in the areas of cover, and we went in there, and we were just hopefully using good geological knowledge and geochemistry, and we delineated the structure that is now hosting this gold resource at Swiftsure. So this is a small niche high grade thing. We're talking currently about just under 120,000 ounces at 4.3 grams. Including in that is this nice high grade core. It's about 60,000 tons for 55,000 ounces, nearly an ounce. So, to me, this reeks of the old Tennant Creek style ore bodies, high grade things that can turn into bigger things, and they get started early, create that cash flow. And with this current high gold price, that's what we're about now, is can we turn this into a cash flow, get this into production. Great recoveries, quartz veining. We did a scoping study last year on the original 86,000 ounce resource. We're updating that right now. And look, we're looking at the options to toll treat. The question will be, do we joint venture mine? Do we mine alone? But right now, the task is to get this mine ready. So that means getting native title sorted, having a mining agreement sorted, getting all of the appropriate feasibility work done, like water boring, geotech, economics studies, and working out what's the best way to make shareholder value out of this. We're talking 100, 200 million type free cash flow from this, depending how you do it. The question now is, how do we monetize that for shareholders in the best possible way? And this is sort of just a quick snapshot of what it involves. There's a nice high-grade little chute there that you can see on the long section as a line, but the grades in them are substantial. Relatively narrow, 4 to 5 meters wide. It's a nice little deposit, and it's undercover, so geologically it's quite a nice little technical discovery. But the bonanza grades and the current economic climate of $5,000 gold prices, making a lot of these little projects, as I was talking about before, it's now, how do you get them into a mill? Or do you have to build a mill yourself still? We'll probably start off with a starter pit as being sort of the initial design, and then would go into an underground as the current plan. So stage 1 would be the pit, and then stage 2 to go underground. So I won't dwell on all of the economics. Hopefully people will maybe look at our website and look at our latest presentation. I think that'll be made available for people. I put this one in. A lot of things could be put up as a caption here. I would say it's a good-looking rooster. I'll leave with a few parting comments at the end on the next slide, or two. But you need to enjoy yourself while you're out there. It's the other thing. To me, the big takeaways for all of this is, and I haven't put it up there in words, but you need people and good projects, and then the money comes. is my view. But you need persistence and tenacity, and De Grey is a prime example of that. Good quality data and validation. You need a good geological team, and not just geological, but engineers once you get beyond that. Accountants, you need people that can raise money, and they need to be motivated. And that was the big thing with De Grey. Everybody got motivated. We did go with options early on. Simon did come to me and say, here's my list, and he had about 4 people on it. And I said, no, go back and rethink that. Everybody should get some, down to the receptionist. And for me, that brought the whole team along. Everybody they were committed then. Geological commitment, that's just doing the right job with good people. I'm an 80-20 person. Spend 80% of your time on the 20% that matters. So that's it. And you probably create your own luck, but you need a bit of luck thrown in to find these things. There's probably other things we can take away from it all, but they're probably the ones that I sort of look at. And then my final slide is really, every day is a new day, and you just don't know when you're going to hit it. So
yeah, you got to be drilling to hit it. Yeah,
I could have had a lot of sayings there. One is you can't find anything unless you're drilling.
Yeah, for sure. Oh, that's great. Look, I don't know if we've got time for too many questions, but why did you think, against sort of geological preconception, why did you think that there was potential or good potential for a million-ounce plus deposit up in the Pilbara when widespread preconception was there's nothing decent up there?
I suppose when I saw the data, all the work that was done, what I saw as probably peripheral shear zones. And the real main structure was the one that Hemi's along right now. It's like deep-seated. That was probably in the back of our minds early on, that this was just a good structural setting, and it jogs over from one structure to another. And you had some pretty obvious sort of granite, we thought at the time, intrusions, Mount Dove, intrusion, as acting as pretty rigid bodies. So things have to be shunted around a lot, create some space and get fluids going. There was lots of evidence of mineralisation along all of those shear zones in all of the historical data that De Grey had created early on. That whole 30 kilometres long Wingina is anomalous in some form. Wherever you put a hole, it's just finding the dilations to go. And so there's 30 kilometres to go and explore straight away. Then we went and acquired Withnell area, and there's another 40 odd kilometres. With resources along it and a small pit, and you go, well, they've only drilled the top 20 metres in some places, if at all. So I could see, just by exploring along those shear zones and pretty much exploring along the existing resources, we could build this up pretty quickly. Just putting the 2 projects together, we went straight to 600. And in fact, when we did all the numbers on all the drilling the Chinese had done but not added into the resources, it was probably closer to 1 million. I think we put out 1 million ounces, and that was without Taurana. And then we added Taurana, and another 500,000 came pretty quick. So it was probably not a fundamental decision, other than once we got the big project, there was opportunity. We knew that it was a mineralized system. We liked what we were seeing rock-wise and alteration-wise. But I think the real turning point for me was that recognition with Taurana, how you can build ounces quicker. That was probably the bit that really got me.
Right. Well, look, I mean, I've got a whole heap of questions myself, and there's others online, but unfortunately, I think we're going to have to. We're coming close to the end of our time. So yeah, that's been a real privilege. Thank you, Andy, to take us through that discovery. I've absolutely loved it, and I'm sure people watching have as well. So massive thank you for the preparation you put in to put those slides together and to give us the background of what was a absolutely wonderful discovery, and sounds like it's got, will have plenty more to give. So I think we're going to have a poll just quickly to get a little bit of a feedback from audience who've been logged in. Thank you to everybody who has logged in today, and as mentioned, this will be available online, partly tonight and then next week on YouTube. So I just want to mention that our next webinar will, as the first Friday of each month, high noon Eastern Australian time, if you want to watch it live, we are going to have Julian Hanna, currently at Artemis Resources, also exploring up in the Pilbara, but he's going to tell us about the discoveries he's made in nickel at Spotted Quoll and over in Botswana with Mod Resources. So that'll be no doubt very interesting. But look, that's been a real highlight. Andy, thank you so much. It's been just an absolute pleasure to have you on the Drilling Deeper webinar.
Thank you very much. It's been great fun.
Okay, well, look, once again, thanks to the audience, and we look forward to hopefully seeing everyone again next month.